It wasn't the flowers that hit the floor first, but my stomach. For weeks, I've had a nagging feeling that something's wrong. Clara has been cold and evasive, and she always hangs up the phone quickly when I come in. But what happened that night took me by surprise. It had been a long, hopeful day. The board meeting had ended sooner than expected, and I had decided to surprise my wife with her favorite flowers. Clara loved these flowers. Whether it was an anniversary or not, they were a symbol of our love. She once said I was naive back then. As I entered the house, laughter made me stop in my tracks. It was Clara's laughter, but no longer the kind of laughter she left me with. It was soft, almost flirtatious, and came from the living room. My pulse quickened. The sound was soft, but clear enough to carry across the hallway. I moved closer, and that's when I saw him, Nathan. He stood there casually, leaning against the doorway, as if he owned the place. His hand was lazily resting on Clara's hip, and he was wearing my robe, a gift from Clara last Christmas. This scene might have been ridiculous if it weren't so heartbreaking. Clara was facing him, her face flushed. When she leaned in to kiss him, I felt my world collapse. The kiss was neither stolen nor hesitant, but bold and deliberate, as if they had done it 100 times before. I must have made a sound, perhaps a flower brushing against the doorframe, or my breath catching, because both of them turned to look at me. Nathan did not flinch. Instead, he gave a sneer, cocking his head arrogantly, igniting the anger in me. "It's not what you think," Clara stammered, taking a step back and going pale. But Nathan didn't even bother to lie. He laughed cheekily. "You shouldn't have come back now," he said casually, almost mocking me, as if I were the intruder in this situation. I stared at them, their faces written with betrayal, and suddenly my insides crumbled. But in a way you wouldn't expect. No shouting, no violence, no immediate confrontation. Instead, I smiled. It was a cold, carefully planned smile that made Clara's eyes widen and her hands flop to her chest like a fragile bird. I nodded slowly, as if to say I saw it, and then said, "Enjoy the robe, Nathan. It won't suit you for long." Without saying anything more, I turned around and walked out, not to escape, but to plan. I sat in the car for hours, clutching the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles turned white. The flowers lay on the passenger seat, their smell sickening. Over and over again, I played the scene back in my mind. The expression on Clara's face, Nathan's smug smile. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt me, but also their arrogance in thinking they could treat me with such contempt in my own home. Nathan was no ordinary person. He was my best friend, business partner, and the person I trusted most. And Clara, she was supposed to be my pillar, confidant, and beloved. I could have confronted them right there and then, shouted at them, demanded answers. But what would that have achieved? Words could not undo the betrayal, and anger could not fill the void in my chest. No, I wanted more than answers. I wanted justice. Sitting in the car, I made a decision. I would not let them destroy me. Not my marriage, not my career, not my dignity. If they thought they could take it all from me, they were wrong. I didn't go back inside that night. Instead, I drove to someone I knew would help me, Liam Carter, a retired intelligence officer and my closest ally outside Nathan, who could turn betrayal into a weapon. By the time I reached his door, the flowers in my hand had wilted, but my resolve was stronger than ever. When Liam opened the door, he saw me and a worried frown creased his face. I said only one word. I need your help. They both need to pay. And so the war began. When you're betrayed like this, the first reaction is anger, a hot, blind desire to break everything. But sitting in Liam's living room that night, I took a reluctant sip of wine and knew that anger wouldn't get me anywhere. What I needed was a strategy, and strategies were my specialty. Liam leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes studying me like he was examining a puzzle. He hadn't said much since I told him what had happened. That was his way. Always let the other person talk first. Reveal too much information. So, you fucked your wife and tried to bring down your company, Liam finally said, his voice calm. What do you want to do? It was a question full of possibilities, and we both knew it. Liam was no stranger to revenge, and his time and intelligence had given him a unique taste for precision. I didn't need to explain what I wanted. He could see it in my eyes. I want to destroy him, I said firmly. Not just him, but her too. But Nathan, he will regret thinking he can outsmart me. Liam nodded, a faint smile curling the corners of his mouth. Very well. Then let's start with the intelligence. The first step was to understand the extent of their betrayal, how long it had been going on, how much confidential information Nathan had stolen from the company, and most importantly, what their plans were. Liam and I worked through the night, devising a strategy to dismantle Nathan bit by bit. We started with Clara's phone. It was actually quite simple. Liam installed a harmless app on her phone, while I pretended to forgive her for her cold behavior earlier that week. Within hours, we were able to access her texts, calls, and even her location. The texts were revealing, depicting a woman bored with her husband's conformity and infatuated with Nathan's swagger. Messages like, "Michael has stopped talking to me, and you make me feel alive," made me seethe. But it wasn't just the text that mattered, it was the whole plan. Nathan had not only stolen my wife, he had also stolen my business. Liam had carefully examined the financial records and found evidence of embezzlement, the blatancy of which was almost laughable. For months, Nathan had been transferring funds to an offshore account in preparation for selling our company's technology patents to a competitor. And Clara had helped him cover his tracks. It was sickening. They had built a house of cards, thinking I was blind to what was going on. But seeing it wasn't enough. I needed to act. The first step was delicate. Nathan and Clara needed to believe they were safe, that I knew nothing. So I played my part. The part of a busy husband who doesn't notice his wife drifting away, the part of a trusting business partner who doesn't suspect betrayal. I didn't confront Clara when her phone lit up under the table while she was texting Nathan at the dinner table. I didn't flinch when she left the house late at night, using vague excuses to meet friends. Instead, I set a trap. Liam helped me plant a tracker in Clara's car and a listening device in Nathan's office. The beauty of technology is that people rarely notice it until it's too late. Within a few days, I had collected enough recordings and notes to paint a vivid picture of their plan. Not only had they betrayed me, they had underestimated me. One evening, Clara left the house around midnight. I followed her from a distance, turning off my car's lights and keeping my heart rate steady. She drove to Nathan's apartment, an address I was now all too familiar with. I parked a block away and watched her enter, not hiding her familiarity with the place. That night, I didn't need to follow her in. I already had all the evidence I needed. The next day, Nathan called me to discuss a potential opportunity for the company. I have to admit, he was very smooth. talking about opening up new markets while already sticking his hand in the till. I sat facing him in the office conference room, smiling as if we were still best friends. "That sounds promising," I said, nodding. "You always know how to spot a good opportunity, Nathan," he said with a grin, the smug grin I'd seen on his doorstep, and he said, "Trust me, Michael. This could be a really big thing for both of us." If only he knew. That night, Liam and I went over the evidence we had gathered. We had recordings of Nathan and Clara discussing their affair, details of their plan to sell the company, and evidence of Nathan's offshore accounts. It was time to move to phase 2. "You've got the intelligence," Liam said in a serious tone. "It's time to hit the target." I didn't respond immediately. I stared at a photo of Clara on my phone, a candid shot of her when she was happier. She was smiling, her hand on mine, completely unaware of the storm she would cause in my life. "Not yet," I finally said, putting the phone down. "Let them think they've won. The higher they climb, the harder they'll fall." Liam laughed. "You're thinking like a strategist now. The beauty of revenge is its subtlety. You don't strike first, but make your prey dance around the fire until they get too close to feel the heat." That's exactly what I did. Clara and Nathan think they're safe, that I'm completely unaware of their betrayal. It's time to make them question everything. It all starts with small things. I moved Clara's favorite book, the one she always keeps on the nightstand, so that she noticed a small detail that she might have thought was just carelessness on my part. But I repeated the action again and again. Each time she noticed, I saw her frown and hesitate to put it back. It worked. Then there was the cologne. I knew Nathan had started using it. I made sure to leave my cologne bottle in the guest bathroom when he arrived. Clara was well aware of this. I saw Nathan glance over his shoulder the first time he caught a whiff of the faint cologne scent. His confidence flickered for just a second. That was enough. At dinner, I would ask questions that were less like accusations, but were enough to make Clara uneasy. "How was your day?" I asked one evening as I twirled my pasta with my fork. "Anything interesting happen?" She froze for a moment. Her fork stopped at the edge of her mouth. "Oh, nothing special," she said a little too quickly. Same old, same old." I leaned back in my chair and smiled. "That's good. I like our life. The way it is now, simple, honest." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. Nathan was more difficult, but even his arrogance had its limits. I began leaving cryptic notes in Clara's handbag, things like, "I know what you did, and the truth will come out." Clara, panicking, showed the notes to Nathan, who dismissed them as a prank. But I could see the cracks forming. One evening, I placed a photo of Clara and me on the coffee table in Nathan's apartment. Liam and I broke in while they were away, and apart from the photo, we made sure to leave no traces. Clara immediately called me when she saw the photo, her voice shaking. "Michael, did you leave the photo at Nathan's?" she stuttered. I pretended to be puzzled. "What are you talking about? Why would I do that?" Her silence spoke volumes. Nathan, on the other hand, began to lose sleep. Liam's idea of intermittent visits to his apartment was working very well. There was a glimmer of light in the doorways here and there, and the lights flickered. Nathan's bluff was beginning to crumble. One night, Liam slipped into the garage and removed the spark plug from Nathan's car, so that it would stall whenever he started it. Nathan became paranoid, convinced that someone was spying on him. Clara tried to reassure him, but her nerves were also stretched to the limit. "You're imagining things," she whispered once. not knowing I'd recorded the conversation. "Michael suspects nothing," Nathan retorted. "He's not stupid, Clara. He knows. I can feel it. If only he knew how much I know." The next phase of my plan was more overt. I started to appear in places Nathan frequented, cafes, restaurants, even the gym. I never said a word to him, or even acknowledged his presence. I just made sure he saw me. The first time he saw me, he took a startled step back, then nodded at me triumphantly, regaining his confidence. By the third time, he couldn't hide the unease in his eyes. Clara, on the other hand, started to back off. She started canceling plans and avoiding her usual social circle. When I asked her why, she muttered that she needed space. I did not miss the irony. The best thing was that they could not accuse me of anything without exposing themselves. Clara could not confront me about the note or the cologne without admitting her affair. Nathan could not report the break-in without raising questions about why I had targeted him in the first place. They were trapped in the web they had woven, and I was the spider, patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. One evening, Clara sat across from me at dinner, fidgeting with the edges of her napkin. "You've been a little different lately," she said hesitantly. I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" She hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I don't know, quieter, like there's something you're hiding from me." I smiled and leaned forward slightly. "Maybe I'm just observant." Her breathing quickened, and for a moment her mask slipped. She looked guilty, even a little scared. I deliberately prolonged the moment, savoring it, and then continued eating as if nothing had happened. The beauty of psychological warfare is that it doesn't need to be loud or flashy. Sometimes it's the quiet moments, the missing books, the misplaced photos, the lingering smells that are the most lethal. Clara and Nathan thought they were playing games with me. What they didn't know was that I had already rewritten the rules. The fun was just beginning. I spent weeks setting the stage, watching them suffer from the torment of guilt and paranoia. But the mind games are just the beginning. It's time for the first blow. It won't be loud, but it will be precise, targeted, and devastating. Nathan and Clara won't even notice it coming. It all starts with Nathan's finances. He prides himself on being meticulous, but arrogance can also lead to blind spots. Liam has discovered his offshore accounts and the secret safe where he hides the money he stole from our company. What Nathan doesn't know is that I now control every button in his financial life. Late one night, while Nathan was no doubt fast asleep in my dressing gown, I sat at my desk, the light from my laptop reflecting the determined look on my face. Liam had set up access to Nathan's accounts, and with a few clicks of the mouse I transferred every last penny he had stolen, including every penny he thought he could get away with. It all disappeared, transferred to charity, and could never be traced back to me. The next morning, Nathan called me. "Michael, we need to talk," he said, his voice tinged with panic. "What's wrong?" I asked, feigning concern. "It's nothing urgent," he lied. "There's just been some problems with the accounts. I'm dealing with it." I smiled to myself. "If you need help, let me know." The irony felt so good. His financial crisis was not enough. I needed to destroy his reputation. Nathan had been wooing a competitor with a deal to sell our company's most valuable asset. The details of the deal were supposed to be kept secret until I leaked them in an anonymous email. I sent the documents and recordings to the head of the rival board. These were not just simple leaks. They portrayed Nathan as an unstable, untrustworthy thief. Within hours, the deal was off and Nathan's reputation was in tatters. That evening, I heard about his reaction from Clara. She came home on edge, her lips pressed into a thin line. She barely touched her dinner, and when I asked her casually how her day had been, she snapped, "Fine," her response telling me everything. Nathan was on the decline, and Clara was being dragged down with him. The true art of revenge is convincing your enemy that they are reaping the consequences of their own actions. To Clara and Nathan, their misfortune seemed like a series of unfortunate coincidences, but I had planned every move. Take the dinner party, for example. Nathan had intended the charity event as a networking opportunity. I arrived dressed to impress and confident, which clearly made him uncomfortable. We exchanged polite pleasantries, but I made sure to hide the innuendo in my words. I raised my glass to him and said, "Success is about trust. Don't you agree, Nathan?" His hand tightened around his glass, and a look of doubt flashed across his face. What he didn't know was that Liam had slipped into the car park between events and planted incriminating evidence, forged documents and records that portrayed Nathan as the mastermind behind a fraudulent company conspiracy, in Nathan's car. By morning, the documents would be in the hands of the authorities. Next, I turned to Clara. I wanted her to feel the weight of betrayal, a weight that far exceeded guilt. So I started with her social circle, anonymously sending her closest friends photos of her and Nathan that I had collected over weeks of surveillance. Clara began to receive more and more invitations to brunches and weekend getaways. Her friends stopped returning her calls, and those who did were curt and brief. She began to stay at home, and the once confident air about her was replaced by a quiet, restless mood. One evening, she was sitting on the sofa opposite me, frowning as she looked at her phone. I didn't ask what was wrong. I didn't need to. Instead, I poured her a glass of wine and said, "Tough day?" She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, it was. I clinked glasses with hers. Here's to better days. The toast was hollow. We both knew it. The first phase of my plan culminated in Nathan's account being frozen. It was actually quite simple. The authorities had received another anonymous tip-off pointing to his overseas transactions. Within a few hours, his financial empire had been reduced to ashes. When he called me that afternoon, his voice was shaking. "Michael, I need your help," he said. "There's a problem with my account." I interrupted him, keeping my tone calm. "Calm down. I'm sure it's nothing serious. You've always been good with money." There was a deafening silence. By the end of that weekend, Nathan had become a shadow of the man who had smiled at me at my front door. Clara had also become quiet and withdrawn. They didn't know it yet, but I was just getting started. The first blow had been dealt, and now it was time to strike at the heart of the matter. Revenge is not just about personal vendettas. It's about making your enemies crumble in front of the world. Nathan and Clara won't just quietly endure. No, their downfall will be spectacular, chaotic, and unforgettable. The first blow has weakened them. Now it's time to completely unmask them. Let's start with Clara. She has always been the elegant example of the circle of friends, the kind of elegance and maturity that others envy. But I know that with the right pressure, her facade will quickly crumble. I started by carefully selecting some photos and text messages and sending them to her closest friends. The text messages between her and Nathan left no room for interpretation. The result was immediate. Clara's best friend Elena was the first to turn on her. Elena is a traditionalist who values loyalty above all else. When she saw the evidence of Clara's infidelity, she immediately spread the news. The next day, Clara became the subject of whispers and innuendos from everyone in her social circle. Clara noticed the change almost immediately. Her once full schedule of brunches, shopping trips, and wine-tasting evenings began to empty out. She received fewer and fewer invitations, and when she did, they were accompanied by cold stares and forced smiles. At first, she pretended not to care, but I could see the cracks forming. Her confidence wavered, her laughter became strained, and she spent her evenings at home, frowning and scrolling through her phone. One evening, she confronted me. "Do you think people are avoiding me?" she asked hesitantly. I shrugged and pretended not to know. "Why? You've always been popular." She didn't answer, but the doubt in her eyes was palpable. Nathan, on the other hand, required a different approach. His entire reputation rested on the illusion of competence and charm. He thrived on the admiration of his peers, the trust of his clients, and the envy of his competitors, all of which made him the perfect target. I started small, leaking snippets of his financial mismanagement to a few key figures in the business. These were not outright accusations, just enough to plant the seeds of doubt. Within days, rumors of Nathan's reliability were starting to circulate at board meetings and social events. But the real humiliation came at a high-profile industry conference. Nathan had been scheduled to speak, and his name proudly appeared on the event promotional materials. I made sure I was in attendance, sitting in the back of the packed auditorium as he took the stage. As Nathan began his carefully rehearsed speech, I sent an anonymous email to the conference organizers. Attached was the file Liam and I had planted in his car weeks earlier, evidence of fraudulent transactions, embezzlement, and offshore accounts. Soon, whispers could be heard from the stage. At first, Nathan continued his speech, oblivious to the growing tension in the room. But then someone in the audience stood up and interrupted him. "Mr. Cole," the person said in a loud, firm voice, "can you respond to the allegations of financial misconduct?" Nathan froze. His elegant composure was gone, and for a moment, he looked like a deer in the headlights. He stammered his response to the charges, but it was already too late. As he walked off the stage, his reputation had plummeted. Back at home, Clara broke down. Furious to hear that Nathan had disgraced himself in public, not because of what he had done, but because it had brought her into disrepute. She confronted him in the apartment, her voice rising as she demanded answers. "You promised me everything would be fine," she shouted. The bug I installed a few weeks earlier captured her words perfectly. "Now everyone thinks I'm as guilty as you." Nathan shot back, his own frustration erupting. "If you weren't so careless, none of this would have happened." The argument escalated, their voices intertwining in a chaotic symphony of accusations and denials. When I listened to the recording later, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The next step was to expose their affair to the public. I contacted a local tabloid under a pseudonym and provided them with the most explosive details of Clara and Nathan's betrayal. A few days later, the story, complete with photos, text, and timeline, hit the front page. The headline read, "Power Couple Falls Apart Over Scandal." The article portrayed Clara as a gold-digging woman and Nathan as a schemer, their actions laid bare for all to see. Clara's reputation plummeted, and her perfect image collapsed. Meanwhile, Nathan's business partners began to cut him off, unwilling to be associated with someone whose name had become synonymous with scandal. Clara couldn't take the pressure. One night, she burst into tears at the dinner table. "I don't know what's happening, Michael," she sobbed, her voice full of despair. "It's as if the whole world is against me." I reached across the table and put my hand on her shoulder, feigning concern. "I'm here for you," I said, patting her hand. "No matter what happens." She clung to me like a drowning man clutching at a straw, completely unaware that it was I who was dragging her down. The beauty of public humiliation is that it forces people to confront their worst fears. For Nathan and Clara, it meant watching their carefully constructed lives fall apart while I stood by, seemingly unmoved. The best part was that they still had no idea what was coming next. I watched them crumble bit by bit, like a house built on rock, but now it was time to face the conflict head-on. This was not going to be a messy fight, no. That was not my style. This was going to be a conflict that Nathan would never forget, and that would make him realize who he had underestimated. A charity gala provided the perfect opportunity for this confrontation. Nathan, who had managed to maintain a semblance of his former reputation, used the event to reconnect with those who still believed in him. Clara was, of course, absent, hiding from the daily humiliation. I arrived late, filling the room with the sound of conversation and clinking glasses before I entered. I wore a sharp black suit, one that was striking without being ostentatious. As I looked around the room, I saw Nathan at the bar, laughing loudly and clutching his whiskey glass as if it were his lifeline. His laughter stopped abruptly when he saw me. His smile became stiff, forced, and uneasy. I raised my glass from the other side of the room to signal to him and nodded slightly. That was enough to make him finish the rest of his drink in one gulp. I waited until Nathan was cornered near the balcony. He was talking to a potential investor, and his charm factor shot up to 11. As I approached, I placed a hand on his shoulder, forcing him to look at me. His smile became a little more reluctant. "Michael," he said in an unusually pleasant voice, "what a surprise. I thought I'd join the fun." I replied, probably still sounding a little bit like, "Charity is a good way to wash your conscience clean." He heard the sting in my words, and his jaw tightened. The investor sensed the tension in the air, and awkwardly made excuses to leave, leaving us alone. "Let's talk," I said, pointing to the balcony. It wasn't a request. The city skyline stretched out before us, gleaming and endless. As we walked outside, Nathan tried to look cool, casually leaning against the railing, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. "What are you thinking, Michael?" he asked, his tone laced with irritation and unease. I leaned against the railing on the other side, hands in my pockets. "Oh, just thinking about trust," I said calmly, "how fragile it is, how easily it can be broken." Nathan stiffened, but didn't respond. I let the silence continue, watching him squirm under my gaze. "Here's the thing," I continued, getting harder and harder. "You didn't just betray me, Nathan. You betrayed everything we built together. The company, the partnership, our friendship. And for what? A few $1 million in a cheap deal?" Nathan opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. "Save it," I said coldly. "I've heard enough lies for a lifetime." Nathan looked genuinely panicked for the first time. "Listen, Michael," he began, his voice quavering. "I didn't think things would go this far. Things just happened. They just happened." I repeated it, my voice full of disdain. That's your excuse? He ran a hand through his hair, and the calm facade gradually crumbled. I made a mistake, okay? But we can fix it. The company? I interrupted with a smile. The company is fine. You're the one who screwed up. His eyes widened in horror. What do you mean? I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice and speaking in a threatening tone. You think I don't know about the offshore accounts, the stolen funds, and the deals with the competitors? I've been 5 steps ahead of you the whole time, Nathan. His panic turned to anger. You set me up, he hissed. I smiled, a cold, calculated smile that made him take a step back. I didn't set you up, Nathan. You did all of this on your own. I just guided the process. Nathan lunged at me, his face full of fury, but I was ready for him. With my military training, it was easy to avoid his attacks and pin him against the railing. He struggled, but I held on to him, leaning against him. You're finished, Nathan, I whispered, my tone cold and deadly. Every bridge you've built has been burned. Every ally you thought you had has turned their back on you. And Clara? She's as broken-hearted as you are. His struggle ceased, and he slumped dejectedly against the railing, defeated. What do you want from me? He muttered, his voice barely audible. I took a step back and let him go. I want you to remember this moment, I said, the moment you lost everything because of your arrogance. He stared at me with vacant eyes. You're a monster, he whispered. I shrugged. He who knows others knows himself. I left him alone on the balcony, a broken man, clinging to the last vestiges of his dignity, while I walked back to the dinner party. I couldn't help but smile. This wasn't the end. Not yet. But it was a start. Nathan had broken, but I wasn't finished. Far from it. Nathan wasn't the only one who had broken. Clara, the woman I had once loved, was now but a shadow of herself. It is not enough to make her feel the consequences of her actions. I want her to carry a sense of guilt with her every moment. If Nathan's arrogance drove him to betray, Clara's betrayal stems from weakness, and I intend to exploit this weakness until it consumes her. Clara has always prided herself on her image, the perfect wife, graceful hostess, and favored companion. Now, her image has been shattered. Her friends no longer confided in her in private, but publicly shunned her. Invitations stopped coming, and text messages went unanswered. Even her family began to distance themselves, embarrassed by the public scandal. I watched as she struggled to maintain a semblance of calm, but her facade crumbled with each passing day. She spent more and more time staring blankly at her phone, as if waiting for someone to come to her rescue. The once confident woman was now hiding in her own world, a world she once had under control. One evening, I found her sitting on the sofa wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red from crying. What's wrong? I asked, feigning concern. She sobbed, trying to compose herself. Nothing, I'm just tired, she said. Why are you tired? I pressed gently, keeping my tone soft. Her lips trembled and her gaze shifted away. I don't know, Michael. It feels like everything is falling apart. I wanted to laugh at the irony of her words, but I sat down next to her and patted her shoulder reassuringly. You'll be fine, I said calmly but firmly. Sometimes we all have to face the consequences of our actions. She looked up at me sharply, her eyes wide. For a moment, I thought she was going to accuse me of knowing all along, but she didn't. Instead, she looked down at her hands, her guilt almost suffocating. Clara's suffering was not only emotional, but was beginning to show physically. She had lost weight. Her once radiant skin had turned pale, and dark circles had permanently settled under her eyes. The vivacious, energetic woman I had married had become gaunt and breathless under the weight of betrayal. But I wasn't finished yet. Guilt is a powerful tool, but it needs to be sharpened constantly to have a profound effect. One morning, I left a photo on the kitchen counter, a smiling photo of Clara and me from a beach holiday a few years ago. Below the photo, I wrote a simple note. Remember when we were happy? She found the note while making coffee, and I watched her freeze, her hands shaking as she picked it up. Her reaction was exactly what I hoped for. She clutched the photo to her chest, tears welling up in her eyes, and whispered, "I'm sorry." She didn't think I heard, but I did, and her apology wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. That night, I played my ultimate card. I cooked dinner, something I hadn't done in weeks, and set the table as if nothing had happened. Clara was taken aback by this gesture, and she sat across from me with a glimmer of faint hope in her eyes that maybe, just maybe, things could go back to normal. "I was thinking about us," I said as I poured her a glass of wine. "Thinking about the old days." She blinked, her expression wary. "What do you mean?" I smiled, leaning forward a little. "You know, before things got complicated." She took a quick breath, and I saw panic flash in her eyes. She gave a nervous laugh. "Complicated? What are you talking about?" "Oh, just life," I say dismissively, waving my hand. "Work stress, everyday chores. It's easy to lose sight of the important things, isn't it?" She nods slowly, her hands clutching the glass as if for dear life. "Yes, it is." I prolonged the silence on purpose, watching her squirm, before finally saying, "I think we should focus on rebuilding what we've lost. What do you think?" Her head shot up, and I saw relief and fear mixed in her expression. "Yes," she said hastily, "I think that's a good idea." I raised my glass and toasted to a new beginning. She touched her glass to mine, her hands trembling. She didn't know it yet, but this wasn't our new beginning. It was the beginning of her decline. Clara's guilt began to consume her. She tried hard to be more attentive and more involved, but her efforts only made her seem more desperate. She began to cook elaborate meals, leave notes in my briefcase, and inquire about my day with an almost pitiful forced cheer. I played along, pretending to accept her efforts while secretly reveling in her suffering. The harder she tried, the more I could see how far she had fallen. And the best part was that she didn't even realize it. Every effort she made to make amends only deepened her guilt. One evening, as we sat on the sofa watching TV, Clara turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Michael," she said hesitantly, "have you ever thought about us?" "Of course," I replied neutrally. She took a deep breath, and her voice trembled. "Do you think we can go back to the way things were?" I gazed at her, letting her question settle in the air. Finally, I said, "It depends on you, Clara. Are you willing to do whatever it takes to get things back on track?" She nodded fervently, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, anything." I smiled and leaned back on the sofa. "Good. Then let's start with honesty." Her face paled, and I saw a flash of fear in her eyes. She didn't know that she had just entered the next phase of my plan. Nathan and Clara thought they had escaped the storm I had unleashed, but they didn't know that I was just toying with them. Their paranoia, guilt, and despair were just the appetizer. Now it was time for the main course, total destruction. Nathan can barely hold on. His accounts are frozen, his reputation in tatters, and rumors of legal disputes have reached his remaining business partners. He spends his days avoiding creditor calls and his nights drowning his sorrows. But his biggest mistake was to turn to Clara as his last lifeline. However, Clara has also broken down. Her guilt at betraying me, combined with the public humiliation she has faced, has left her a shell of her former self. Their relationship, once rooted in betrayal and arrogance, had become an abyss of mutual resentment. I recorded the escalating arguments through the bug I had planted. Nathan blamed Clara for their relationship breakdown, while Clara accused Nathan of dragging her into his mess. One evening, their argument reached a fever pitch. Nathan accused Clara of being careless and weak, while Clara retorted that he had ruined her life. Their voices echoed through Nathan's apartment, while I sat in the car outside, sipping my coffee and smiling as I watched them destroy each other so beautifully. It was time to end it. I sent Nathan a message on Clara's phone. "We need to talk. Meet me at the warehouse." I knew Nathan wouldn't refuse that location. It was connected to the old business we had celebrated together. It was symbolic. I watched from a distance as Nathan arrived, his face tense, his eyes darting around nervously. He came in and called Clara's name. He was greeted by my voice, not hers. "Are you looking for someone, Nathan?" I emerged from the shadows, calm and collected. The expression on his face was priceless. Confusion, fear, and anger all mixed together. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I think the better question is, what are you doing here?" I replied, circling him like a predator. "You thought you could steal my wife, my company, and my life and get away with it." Nathan tried to justify himself with a growl. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted him. "You're a thief, a liar, and a coward. And now you're finished." Nathan lunged at me, his face full of anger, but I was ready for him. Thanks to my military training, I easily avoided his attack and pinned him to the ground as he struggled. I leaned in close and whispered, "Nathan, you should know the consequences of betraying me. You've always thought you were clever, but in reality you're just a pawn." I let him stand up and watched him stagger back, breathing heavily. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice betraying his defeat. "I've already got it," I answered coldly. "Your life is in pieces, your reputation in tatters. You've lost everything through your greed. But don't worry, this is the final chapter of your story." I left him, humiliated and devastated. He didn't know that I had already revealed his whereabouts to the authorities and provided all the evidence needed to secure his arrest. The next morning, Nathan was taken into custody, his smug grin replaced by handcuffs and despair. With Nathan out of the picture, Clara was next. She had no idea that I had orchestrated it all. She must have felt like the whole world was against her, but I wasn't finished yet. The day after Nathan's arrest, I filed for divorce, making sure she received the news in the most public way possible. Clara appeared at the house crying and distraught. "Michael, please," she pleaded, clutching the divorce papers. "I know I've made mistakes, but we can fix it." "I can fix it." I looked at her with an inscrutable expression. "Do you think this can still be salvaged, Clara? You have not only betrayed me, but also destroyed everything we have built together. And for what? For someone who leaves you with nothing. Her sobs filled the room, but I felt no sympathy. It's over, I said simply. You will get nothing from me, no money, no sympathy, nothing. You have chosen your own path, and now you can go down it alone. Her tears turned to anger as she tried to blame me for her actions. You distanced yourself from me. You stopped talking to me. I laughed bitterly. Is that what you tell yourself at night when you go to sleep? That it's my fault you betrayed me? Clara completely broke down and collapsed onto the sofa. She knew she had lost. The divorce was finalized quickly, and she was left with nothing and no support. She packed her bags and left town, becoming a disillusioned and downtrodden woman. Clara and Nathan were gone, and I finally felt a sense of peace. But it wasn't victory, it was emptiness. Revenge had been my long-term goal, and now that it was gone, I felt adrift. I spent weeks reflecting on what had happened, trying to figure out the direction I wanted my life to take. Eventually, I found solace in helping others. I turned my pain into something meaningful by donating part of my estate to organizations that help victims of betrayal. One quiet evening, I went to Nathan's grave. It was a simple, unmarked grave, fitting for a man with nothing. I placed a rose on the grave and muttered, "You always had a smile on your face when you betrayed me. Now you can rest 6 feet under with that same smile." As I walked away, the weight of the past lifted from my shoulders. That chapter was closed, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to move on.